I thought I had everything I needed: a home, a family, a future. After 30 years of marriage, I had made sacrifices I thought would last forever. But one fateful afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table where we had shared countless meals, my life as I knew it was shattered. He handed me a letter, told me my marriage was over, and that the house I built with my own hands, the home I had poured my heart into, no longer belonged to me. He had changed his will without my knowledge, leaving me with nothing. No explanation, no remorse, just a cold, calculated plan to erase me from his life, and a reminder that everything I had worked for, everything I thought I could count on, had been stolen from me in an instant. And as the days went by, I realized one thing: he had made the biggest mistake of his life because he didn't realize the one thing he'd forgotten. I wasn't the woman who would simply walk away. I was the woman who would fight for everything he thought he could take from me. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, her fingers wrapped around the mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She hadn't meant to sit there so long, but the stillness of the house around her had drawn her into a quiet reverie. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, but Eleanor didn't mind. It was moments like these, quiet, peaceful, when the weight of the years spent building her life with Peter, her husband of 30 years, felt the lightest. Their home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had always been more than just a place to live. It had been the backdrop to every chapter of their shared history: the laughter of their children growing up, the quiet evenings spent reading in the living room, the hum of life going on as it always had. Eleanor had always prided herself on creating a haven for Peter and their children, a space filled with love, warmth, and stability. She glanced around the kitchen, where she'd spent countless hours preparing meals, helping with school projects, and listening to Peter's stories about his day. The walls were adorned with family photos, pictures of their children when they were young, family vacations at the beach, and anniversaries they had celebrated together. She could still picture the day they had moved in, Peter, full of optimism, promising her that this house would be their forever home. They had started it all from scratch, building a life together, brick by brick. Eleanor had given up a promising career when their son, Lucas, was born. Peter's demanding job at the law firm often required late nights, and it became clear that someone had to be home for Lucas. She had stepped into that role without hesitation, knowing that this was where she was meant to be. She had always been the backbone of their family, the one who ensured everything ran smoothly. Whether it was organizing the household finances, attending every parent-teacher conference, or simply making sure there was dinner on the table when Peter came home exhausted from work, Eleanor was always there. Her sacrifice had been quiet, often unnoticed by others, but it had never bothered her. It was the role she had taken on willingly, because she believed in the partnership they had built, the shared vision for their family's future. And Peter, always so consumed with his career, had never once questioned her devotion or the sacrifices she had made. That was, until the day the letter arrived. But before that day, everything had seemed so perfect. She allowed herself to reflect on those times, the days when Peter came home with a smile, when they shared jokes over dinner, when their children were little and they would sit around the dinner table together, their lives so full of promise. There had been tough times, of course. Every marriage had its ups and downs, but they had weathered it all, side by side. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to their last anniversary. Peter had surprised her with a dinner at her favorite restaurant. She could still remember the smile on his face as he held her hand across the table, telling her how much he appreciated everything she did. "You're the heart of this family," he had said, his voice sincere. "I wouldn't have anything without you." At the time, she had smiled back, believing every word. Now, those words seemed like a cruel joke. Her thoughts shifted to the kids. Lucas had just graduated from college, and Claire, their youngest, was finishing her final year of high school. Peter and Eleanor had always dreamed of these moments, watching their children grow into young adults, full of promise. There had been talks about what the next chapter would look like. Maybe a vacation, some time to themselves, just the two of them. After all these years of focusing on the kids, she had always imagined that they'd grow old together, the two of them enjoying the fruits of their hard work. But those thoughts were fading now. Eleanor felt the first crack in the surface of her perfect life when she noticed Peter's behavior changing. It was subtle at first: late nights at the office that stretched into weekends, a growing distance between them that had never existed before. At first, she had chalked it up to stress from work, the pressures that came with climbing the ranks in his law firm. He'd always been ambitious, and she had always supported him. But this felt different. His distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. She began to wonder if he was becoming bored with their life, with her. Maybe the years of routine had caught up with him. Maybe she had stopped being interesting to him. She tried not to dwell on the thought, but the insecurity crept in. Like a shadow she couldn't escape. Her suspicions deepened one evening when she overheard a phone conversation between Peter and someone she didn't recognize. The tone of his voice was different, lighter, almost flirtatious. Eleanor had felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she pushed the feeling aside. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Still, the doubts lingered. The morning the letter arrived was an ordinary one. Eleanor had woken up early to make breakfast, the familiar hum of her routine surrounding her. Peter had been unusually quiet, but again, she didn't think much of it. She kissed him goodbye as he left for work, just as she always did, and settled into the day's tasks. The letter came shortly after lunch, addressed to her in a neat, formal handwriting. At first, she thought it might be some form of bank correspondence or a bill that had slipped through the cracks, but when she opened it, she felt the ground beneath her shift. It was a legal document. Her heart began to race as she read the words that seemed to blur in front of her eyes. Peter had changed his will. He had altered it without her knowledge or consent, leaving her with nothing. No house, no savings. Everything they had worked for had been transferred to someone else. The only thing that still belonged to her was the life she had sacrificed everything for, and even that was suddenly in question. At first, Eleanor couldn't process it. She read the letter again, then again, and again. The words were the same, but they made less sense each time. How could he have done this? How could he have stripped her of everything? After everything they had shared, after everything she had given up for him, this was how he repaid her. The letter was signed, simply, Peter. It was clear now. The cracks she had ignored, the subtle signs of change, had all led to this moment. The truth hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Peter had fallen out of love with her. He had found someone else. Someone younger. Someone more exciting. She had always feared this day would come. But the reality was far worse than anything her imagination had conjured. Her perfect life was gone. But what she didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning. Eleanor set the letter down, her hands trembling. The house around her, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like a prison. The life she had built was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a loud, explosive anger. No, it was something quieter, something colder, a steady burn deep within her, fueled by the realization that she had been betrayed, but also something more, a feeling she couldn't name yet, but one that was starting to take shape. The calm facade she had maintained for so many years was beginning to crack, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor wasn't sure if she could keep it together. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to go down without a fight, not this time. The letter had come just after lunch, and by the time Eleanor finished reading it for the fourth time, she felt her entire body tremble. Her eyes blurred, her pulse raced, but the words in front of her were clear. Peter had changed his will without her knowledge. The words seemed like a cruel joke, something her mind couldn't quite comprehend. Her fingers gripped the paper tightly, but the edges felt sharp and foreign in her hands. Eleanor had always prided herself on knowing her husband inside and out. She could sense when something was off, when he was hiding something, but this was different. This felt like an earthquake tearing apart the foundation of everything she had believed in. Her thoughts swirled, and for a moment, the room around her blurred. She stared down at the letter again, trying to make sense of the words that no longer seemed to belong to the life she thought she knew. The letter was from a lawyer, someone she had never met. The coldness in the legal language felt as if it was being spoken by someone other than Peter. "We are writing to inform you that, as per the instructions of your husband, Peter Foster, the will has been updated and is now officially recorded. Please note, as per the updated will, you are no longer the beneficiary of any of the estate's assets. The house, previously held jointly, has been transferred solely to Peter Foster. A portion of the savings has been allocated to other beneficiaries. Please reach out to our office should you have any questions or require further clarification." Ella's breath caught in her throat as she reread the letter again, hoping that somehow it would make more sense. But it didn't. The house, the one they had built together, the one she had worked so hard to turn into a home, to make a life for their family, had been taken from her. and her place in Peter's life, her role in their shared future, had suddenly been erased. Her mind raced. How could this happen? How could Peter do this to her? She had always trusted him. They had shared everything for 30 years, the good, the bad, the moments of joy and the hardships. He had promised that they were a team, that they would grow old together and face life's challenges side by side. She had sacrificed so much for him, putting her career aside, raising their children, supporting him when his work became overwhelming, never once questioning her place in his life. But now, as she stared at the letter, Eleanor was left with nothing but a growing pit of confusion and disbelief in her stomach. She couldn't understand it. She had done everything for him. How could he suddenly decide that she was no longer important? How could he just throw her away, as if 30 years of marriage meant nothing? Her mind snapped back to the quiet mornings, when Peter would kiss her goodbye as he left for work, the moments when they would share a glass of wine on the porch, watching the sunset after a long day. She had believed those moments mattered. She had believed that their life together was something he cherished. But this letter, this cold, legal document, was a stark reminder that she had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. Eleanor pushed herself back from the kitchen table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She walked across the room, the letter still clutched tightly in her hand, as though it were a lifeline she could hold on to. She reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Peter's number. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. "Peter, where are you?" she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. Please, just come home. I need to understand what's happening." But deep down, she already knew. She had seen the subtle changes in him over the past few months, the late nights at work, the way he had become more distant, more distracted. She had tried to push those feelings aside, tried to believe that everything would be fine, but now, it was impossible to ignore the reality staring her in the face. Peter had moved on, and he had moved on without her. She set the phone down, feeling the weight of her thoughts pressing on her chest. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, suffocating even. Her hands rested on the kitchen counter, her fingers splayed out in an attempt to steady herself. Her mind kept going back to the letter, those cold, unforgiving words. How could Peter have done this to her? Eleanor had spent the better part of 3 decades supporting Peter, building a life with him. She had never once questioned his commitment to their marriage. She had believed, like so many women before her, that the bond they shared was unbreakable. But now, as she stood in the silence of their kitchen, it became painfully clear that she had been wrong. She couldn't help but think back to the years they had spent together. The early days, when they were first married, when everything felt so new and exciting. Peter had been her world then. They had talked about their future constantly, shared hopes and dreams, made plans. She had never once imagined that the man who had promised to love her forever could betray her so completely. The betrayal was cutting deeper than she expected. Eleanor had never allowed herself to imagine that something like this could happen. She had always seen herself as strong, capable, and independent. But now, as she stood there in the emptiness of their home, she felt the full weight of the realization that she was nothing to him now. She had no claim to anything they had built together. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. It was her identity, her place in the world. How long had Peter been planning this? Eleanor wondered. How long had he been making decisions behind her back, while she worked tirelessly to support their life? The thought that he could be so calculating, so cold, was almost too much to bear. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to break down, not yet, not in front of him. She would figure this out. She would find a way to fight back. She wasn't going to be swept aside like an old piece of furniture, discarded and forgotten. But first, she needed answers. She needed to understand why. Why had he done this? Why hadn't he talked to her, been honest with her, before making such a life-altering decision? As the hours passed, Eleanor felt herself sinking into a storm of emotions. The calm, reflective moments she had enjoyed earlier in the day now seemed like a distant memory. She was angry, hurt, confused, and above all, terrified. The life she had worked so hard to build was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. She walked back into the living room, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She knew she had to confront Peter, but part of her was terrified of what he would say. What could he possibly say to justify this? Was there any explanation that would make this betrayal make sense? She wasn't sure how long she stood there, lost in thought, before her phone rang. It was Peter. "Eleanor, His voice was distant, as if he was speaking through a thick fog. We need to talk. That's all he had to say. As if this was just another argument, another bump in the road they could overcome. No, she said, her voice calm but firm. You don't get to just talk about this, Peter. You don't get to walk away with everything while I'm left with nothing. I need to understand what happened. What changed? Peter sighed, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might actually answer her question. But then his voice came again, colder this time. Elaine, I've moved on. You need to understand that this is for the best. I can't keep living like this. Eleanor felt her heart stop. You need to understand that this is for the best. Those words cut deeper than anything else. Before she could respond, he hung up. And just like that, everything she thought she knew about her marriage and herself had been shattered. Eleanor hadn't heard from Peter since the phone call, and she spent the next few hours in a fog of disbelief. It was as if the world around her had suddenly shifted into something unrecognizable, and she couldn't make sense of any of it. She had spent years building a life with Peter, and now, in a matter of hours, everything had crumbled. The letter from the lawyer was still sitting on the table in front of her, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had taken root in her life. She could barely look at it anymore, but it was there, and it wouldn't go away. The words seemed to echo in her mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. No longer the beneficiary. The house, transferred solely to Peter. She had to fight to keep her breathing steady. It was impossible to understand. Her eyes were swollen from the tears. She hadn't let herself cry, and as the night dragged on, the sharp pang of betrayal gnawed at her insides. The house, their home, what had once been a sanctuary, a place filled with the laughter of their children, and the quiet moments she and Peter had shared, was slipping away from her. All because of some decision Peter had made without even considering her. She sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where Peter's things had once been: his shoes by the door, his briefcase on the chair where he always left it after work. Everything felt empty, like the world had been drained of color. And in the midst of it all, Eleanor's anger began to rise. She had been patient, quiet, thoughtful. She had never demanded more than she needed from Peter. She had loved him with every part of herself, and this was how he repaid her, by taking it all away without a word, without so much as a conversation. It was time to confront him. Eleanor wasn't sure what she was expecting when she stood in front of the door, her hand hesitating over the handle. The thought of seeing him gone after everything he'd done felt like it would shatter whatever remained of her composure. But she knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't allow him to walk away without answering for his betrayal. Not after all they had shared. Not after everything she had done for him. She forced herself to breathe deeply, then pushed the door open. Peter was sitting in his car when Eleanor arrived at the house. The sight of him, so casual, so detached, was like a punch to the gut. He had always been the one to sit at the head of the table, the one who made the decisions, the one who commanded the room. But now, as he sat there in his car, he looked smaller, less sure of himself, almost like a man who had been caught in his own lie. He didn't look surprised when Eleanor stepped up to the car, just resigned, as if he had expected this moment for some time. Eleanor, he said, his voice low, we need to talk. She didn't waste any time. What the hell happened, Peter? How could you do this to me? Her voice trembled with anger, but she didn't care. She wasn't going to hold back, not this time. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. It's not as simple as you're making it out to be. Not simple, Eleanor repeated, the words a sharp sting in her mouth. You changed your will without even telling me. You took everything we built together, and you gave it to her. To her, how is that not simple? Peter sighed and ran a hand through his hair, an all too familiar gesture that used to calm her, but now it only made her stomach churn. I didn't want to hurt you, he began, his tone more defensive than regretful. But you've had your time, Eleanor. It's time for a change. I've met someone else. Eleanor felt as if the breath had been knocked from her lungs. The words seemed impossible, unreal. But there they were, hanging in the air between them. Someone else, Eleanor repeated, her voice trembling now. And you thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I wouldn't find out. After everything we've been through, you just throw me away. Peter didn't respond right away. His gaze shifted to the windshield, the unease creeping into his posture, but then he looked back at her, his eyes cold. I don't want to fight about this, Eleanor. I don't want to hurt you. But I've made my decision. I'm not the same Man, you married. I need something different now." The words were a slap in the face, and Eleanor had to fight the urge to strike back. Something different. The audacity. "I've been here. I've been here for 30 years, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I built this life with you. I gave up everything for you. And now, after all of that, you tell me I'm not enough, that I'm just some woman who's outlived her usefulness." Peter shifted uncomfortably in the car seat, but his expression didn't change. "You don't get it, do you? I've had to live with you, with everything you've given up for me. But it wasn't what I wanted. I needed someone who could keep up with me, someone who could make me feel alive again." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had loved for so many years, the man who had promised to always be by her side, was telling her that she wasn't enough, that her sacrifices, her love, her devotion didn't matter. She took a step back, her head spinning. Alive, again, that's what he wanted. After everything, this wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage, it was a betrayal of everything she had believed in. All these years, she had thought they were partners, equal in the relationship. But now, she saw the truth for what it was. He had been using her. Her composure cracked, and she could feel the heat of anger rising in her chest. "You're unbelievable. You're actually telling me that you've been cheating on me this whole time. You've been seeing someone else behind my back, and now you think you can just walk away." Peter didn't flinch, but his voice softened slightly. "I didn't want it to be like this. But I can't stay in a marriage that's dead." Eleanor stared at him, speechless. The coldness in his voice was almost unbearable. She wanted to scream, to throw everything in her path at him, but she forced herself to stay still. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of losing control. "Not anymore. You've taken everything from me, Peter," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "Everything. My love, my loyalty, my time. And now, you want me to just let you go, to walk away quietly, to accept this as if it's my fault." Peter looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, but this is the way it has to be. I'm done." Eleanor felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. It wasn't enough that he had taken the house, their savings, their life together. Now, he was stripping her of her dignity. He had already erased her from his life, and now, he was trying to erase her from his own mind. But Eleanor wasn't ready to give up. Not like this. She wasn't going to let him walk away with everything he had taken from her. Not without a fight. "I'll make sure you regret this," she said quietly, her words like ice. "You haven't seen the last of me." Peter didn't respond. He just stared ahead, his jaw set in that same implacable way he always had when he didn't want to hear what she had to say. But Eleanor wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to let him rewrite their history. She wasn't going to let him erase everything they had shared. She walked away from the car, the weight of her decision heavy in her chest, but her resolve clear. She would fight for what was hers. She would fight for herself. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where everything had begun to unravel. The weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. The house was quiet, far too quiet, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Peter's betrayal, the coldness of his words, and the legal papers he'd left behind, everything seemed like it was closing in on her. But today, something had shifted inside her. Today, she wasn't the same woman she had been 2 days ago. She wasn't the woman who would cry herself to sleep, letting the pain swallow her whole. She wasn't the woman who would wait for Peter to come home and offer half-hearted apologies. Today, she was different. Today, she was going to take control. The lawyer's letter still sat in front of her on the table, but this time, it didn't feel as heavy. She'd read it 100 times, and each time, it had made her heart sink deeper. But now, something was stirring within her, a feeling that she hadn't had in years, a sense of clarity. She had been willing to accept the loss of Peter, of the life she thought they would have. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that he hadn't just taken her life from her. He had tried to take everything. He had tried to erase her, and she wasn't going to let him. She picked up the phone, dialing the number she had kept in her contacts for years but never thought she'd used. Monica was a lawyer, an old friend from her college days who had seen her through many moments of personal crisis. When Eleanor had been first married, Monica had been her confidant, someone to laugh with, cry with, and vent about all the ups and downs of married life. But now, Eleanor needed her for something more serious. She needed her to help her figure out what to do next. "Monica," Eleanor said, when the line connected, "I need your help. I've got some things to sort out, things that I never thought I'd be dealing with. There was a pause on the other end. I'm here for you, Eleanor. You know that. What's going on? Eleanor took a deep breath. Peter, he's changed his will. I found out this afternoon. Everything we've built together. The house, the savings, he's left it all to someone else. And he's cut me out. Completely. Monica's voice softened, but there was an edge to it. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. That's beyond betrayal. I don't know what to do, Eleanor admitted. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought Peter would leave me like this. Are you thinking about contesting it? Monica asked, her voice growing more serious. Eleanor hesitated. She had thought about it, of course, but the weight of it had been overwhelming. Peter had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, and now she was faced with the prospect of a legal battle that could tear apart everything she had left. She had never been one to fight, to stand up for herself in this way, but something in her had shifted. I think I have to, Eleanor said, her voice steady now. I can't just walk away. Not this time. Not after everything he's done. There was a long silence before Monica spoke again. Then we're going to do this, Eleanor. We'll fight this. I'll help you every step of the way. Eleanor's chest tightened with emotion. She didn't know if it was relief or fear or something else entirely. But the simple fact that Monica had agreed to help her gave her a small but solid sense of hope. She wasn't alone in this, and that made all the difference. The next few days passed in a blur of legal jargon, paperwork, and long conversations with Monica. Eleanor found herself consumed by the process, poring over every detail of the will and the estate, everything that Peter had so casually decided to take from her. It was as though she was waking up from a long, painful sleep. Her eyes were open now, and she was seeing everything for what it truly was. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just the woman who had been left behind. She was a force to be reckoned with. As she read through the will again, something in her shifted. The anger she had been carrying, the hurt, it all started to transform. It was no longer just an emotional reaction to Peter's betrayal. It had become something more, something focused, something she could control. It wasn't just about the money, the house, or the property. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about Peter trying to erase her, and her refusing to let that happen. She called Monica the next day to discuss the legal options. I'm ready, Eleanor said, her voice firm now. I want to contest the will. I want to make sure he understands that this isn't just something I'll let go of. Monica was quiet for a moment, as if taking in Eleanor's newfound resolve. We'll start the process. I can file for a partition action, and we'll demand the court force a sale of the property. You're legally entitled to half, Eleanor. No one can take that from you. The words were a lifeline. Eleanor felt a flood of determination rush through her. She had been living in the shadow of Peter's decisions for too long. She had let him dictate their life, their future, their home. But no more. Let's do it, Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. Let's make them pay for what they've done. The days that followed were filled with strategy sessions, legal discussions, and careful planning. Eleanor spent hours going over every detail, making sure that she was prepared for whatever came next. But more than anything, she realized that this wasn't just a fight for the house or the money. This was a fight for herself, for her own identity, for her own peace of mind. Peter had taken so much from her. He had taken her security, her trust, and the future they had planned together. But there was one thing he couldn't take, and that was her ability to fight back. She wasn't going to be the woman who sat by and let him erase her. She wasn't going to let him walk away with everything while she was left with nothing. Eleanor could feel the change in herself. She wasn't the same woman who had once apologized for speaking up. She wasn't the same woman who had always put Peter's needs ahead of her own. Now, she was the woman who would demand her place. Now, she was the woman who would make Peter regret ever thinking he could push her aside. And that thought gave her a sense of power she hadn't felt in years. When the paperwork was filed and the petition was officially submitted to the court, Eleanor felt an odd sense of release. The legal battle was only beginning, but she had already won in so many ways. She had taken control of her future. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was hers. The emotional turmoil of the past few days of confronting Peter, of dealing with the shock of the betrayal, had transformed into something more focused, more strategic. She wasn't just fighting for money or possessions anymore. She was fighting for her own voice, for her own right to be heard. Eleanor had spent too many years living in the shadows of Peter's decisions, too many years wondering if she was enough. Now, she knew the truth. She was more than enough. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for, and she was going to win. Eleanor had known from the moment she decided to contest Peter's will that the legal battle would be long and grueling. But nothing could have prepared her for the emotional toll the process would take. She had thought the worst was behind her, the betrayal, the hurt, the anger, but now, as she sat across from Monica in the lawyer's office, she realized that this fight would unearth more than just legalities. It would expose the layers of deception Peter had built around their life, the lies he had told, and the emotional neglect that had been simmering beneath the surface of their marriage for years. The legal paperwork had been filed, and now they were in the waiting game. The court hearings loomed over her, like an unseen storm gathering on the horizon. But Eleanor remained calm. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. This wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming her dignity. The first step in the process was the discovery phase, exchanging documents and financial records. Peter had been careful to keep things hidden, but Monica had a way of uncovering the smallest detail. They began poring over their joint accounts, looking for discrepancies, inconsistencies, anything that would reveal Peter's true intentions. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself buried in financial statements, tax returns, and account ledgers. It was slow, methodical work, but with each new document, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She wasn't just waiting for someone else to fix this. She was doing it herself. Piece by piece, the puzzle of their life together began to come into focus, and as she looked closer, she started to see the cracks in Peter's perfect facade. The financial betrayal was the first layer to peel away. There were transfers of money to accounts she didn't recognize, withdrawals that didn't make sense, and investments in businesses she had never heard him mention. For years, she had trusted him to handle their finances. But now she saw that he had been hiding things from her, things that could have jeopardized their financial security had she not been diligent. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the pages as she looked through the records. Peter had been siphoning off money for months, setting aside funds in offshore accounts, and making investments in ventures she knew nothing about. But it wasn't just the money that shocked her. It was the complete disregard for their shared future. For years, Peter had promised they would grow old together, that they would have a secure retirement, and now she saw that he had been planning his escape all along. He had already made the decision to cut her out, long before he'd handed her the divorce papers. She had always believed their marriage was built on mutual trust. But now, the foundation seemed like it had been eroded bit by bit, like sand slipping through her fingers. Every document she uncovered was another piece of evidence that Peter had been planning this for much longer than she had realized. It wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a cold, calculated betrayal. But what hurt the most was the emotional neglect that had been buried under the weight of their daily life. As they dug deeper into their personal records, Eleanor found letters Peter had sent to his lawyer, discussing plans for the future, his business ventures, and surprisingly his new relationship. In one letter, he had even outlined his reasons for moving on from their marriage, citing her lack of emotional support and his need for a fresh start. Eleanor's chest tightened as she read those words. How had she not seen it? For years, she had given everything to their marriage, her time, her love, her energy. She had supported him through career changes, layoffs, and the endless pressure of his work. But all along, he had been silently resenting her, building a case against her in his mind, while she had been completely unaware. The emotional neglect had been the quietest, most insidious form of betrayal, and now, as the legal documents revealed it, it was clear that Peter had already moved on long before their marriage officially ended. The first court hearing came, and Eleanor sat in the back of the courtroom, trying to steady her nerves. She had spent the past few weeks preparing, going over the facts, reviewing the documents, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing Peter in the courtroom. He looked so different now, detached, almost arrogant as he sat, with his lawyer, avoiding her gaze. It was as though she didn't even matter to him anymore. The judge called the case, and both sides were asked to present their arguments. Peter's lawyer was smooth and practiced, presenting their side of the case with confidence. He argued that Peter had made the changes to his will because of Eleanor's lack of involvement in the marriage and her failure to support him emotionally. He painted a picture of a woman who had been neglectful and distant, while Peter had worked tirelessly to provide for their family. It was a narrative that Eleanor knew all too well, the one Peter had been constructing for years. But as Peter's lawyer spoke, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. She wasn't going to let him rewrite their story to suit his narrative. She had lived this life, and she knew the truth. When it was her turn, Eleanor stood and addressed the court. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying fire in it that she had never felt before. She spoke about the years she had spent supporting Peter, raising their children, managing their home. She spoke about the sacrifices she had made and the love she had given, and how she had trusted Peter implicitly. The truth is, Eleanor said, looking directly at Peter, I've given everything to this marriage, and I will not stand by and let him take it all from me. This house, these savings, they are not just his, they belong to both of us. I built this life with him, and I won't let him erase that. The courtroom was silent as her words hung in the air. Eleanor didn't know if the judge was moved. But she knew one thing. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her life. The legal process continued, and the tension between the two sides mounted. Every court date brought new challenges, new documents, and new revelations. Peter's team tried to undermine her credibility, questioning her financial competence and painting her as an unfit partner. They brought in witnesses who claimed that Eleanor had been distant and cold, that she had neglected her responsibilities as a wife. But Eleanor refused to back down. With Monica's guidance, she methodically built her case, showing the discrepancies in Peter's financial records, exposing the lies he had told about their marriage, and providing evidence that he had been planning his escape long before he ever filed for divorce. It wasn't just the financial records that worked in her favor, it was the truth. Eleanor's story was grounded in the reality of her years with Peter, the sacrifices she had made, and the emotional toll of his betrayal. The evidence, though slow to accumulate, was undeniable. Peter's financial dealings, his emotional neglect, and the way he had treated her, everything pointed to a man who had been playing a long con. But the process was far from easy. Every new revelation seemed to come with a setback. Peter's team fought back with counterclaims and legal maneuvers designed to delay the proceedings. They tried to discredit Eleanor at every turn, questioning her character, her ability to manage finances, even her worthiness as a wife. It was clear that they were trying to wear her down, to make her second-guess herself. But Eleanor refused to waver. The rising tension of the legal battle became palpable. Each court date felt like a battle in a war that was far from over. But Eleanor could feel the power building within her. This wasn't just about winning a legal case. It was about reclaiming what was hers, about proving to herself and to Peter that she was more than the sum of his lies. Eleanor knew she couldn't stop now. Every document, every piece of evidence, was a testament to her strength. She was taking back control, piece by piece. She had been quiet for too long, letting Peter's lies dictate her reality. Now, she was writing her own story, and the ending was still to be decided. The final hearing had arrived, and the air in the courtroom felt heavy with anticipation. Eleanor sat at the back, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of the wooden chair. It had been a long, grueling battle, one that had tested every ounce of her resolve. She had poured herself into this fight, uncovering lies, facing obstacles, and reclaiming her dignity piece by piece. But now, as the final day loomed, she felt a strange calmness wash over her. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations, and Eleanor could hear the shuffling of papers, the clink of a gavel being tested. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. This was it, the moment of truth. She had come so far, and she wasn't about to let this moment slip away from her. Peter was sitting at the front of the room, his usual air of confidence replaced by something else, perhaps anxiety, perhaps regret. His lawyer was beside him, talking in low tones, preparing their last defense. The last few days had been filled with tense negotiations, but it was clear that they were on the edge of defeat. Eleanor could see the cracks in their armor. They had fought back hard, but she had the truth on her side. The lies Peter had built over the years were starting to unravel, and it was only a matter of time before the judge made her ruling. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the gavel came down. This is the final hearing in the case of Eleanor Foster versus Peter Foster, the judge said, his voice measured but firm. Both sides have presented their arguments, and it is now time for the court to issue a ruling. Eleanor sat up straighter, her pulse quickening. She had been here countless times before, but today felt different. Today, The fight was finally over. Whatever the judge decided, she would be ready to face it. Peter's lawyer stood up, ready to make his last-ditch attempt to save their case. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "We believe that the changes to Peter Foster's will were made in accordance with his personal wishes and should stand. Eleanor Foster has had ample time to prepare for her future, and we believe that her claims to the estate are unfounded." The judge's eyes never left the lawyer as he spoke. Eleanor could feel the weight of his words, but she didn't flinch. She had heard them all before. Peter's side had tried every angle, painting her as a neglectful wife, undermining her worth, even questioning her ability to manage their finances. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about her right to be seen, her right to be respected after everything she had given to their marriage. When the lawyer finished speaking, it was Eleanor's turn. She stood slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't nervous, she was resolute. This was the culmination of everything she had fought for. She had come to this courtroom as a woman who had been erased from her own life, but now she stood as a woman who would no longer be ignored. "Your Honor," Eleanor began, her voice steady and clear, "I've spent 30 years with Peter, 30 years of my life. I raised our children, I supported him through his career, I built our home, and I made sacrifices that most people wouldn't understand. I trusted him, and I believed in our future. But this isn't just about money. This is about what Peter has done to me, what he has taken from me. Not just the house, not just the savings, but my dignity, my respect, and I will not stand by while he erases me from everything we've built together." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. She could see Peter's eyes, wide and unblinking, staring at her from across the room. There was a flicker of something there, regret, perhaps, or maybe guilt, but Eleanor wasn't interested in that now. She had seen enough of his lies to last a lifetime. "The will that Peter changed was done without my knowledge," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "He made decisions behind my back, and I am not here to ask for what he has taken. I'm here to demand what is rightfully mine." The judge nodded, and Eleanor sat back down, her heart racing, but her head clear. The tension in the courtroom had shifted. The weight of her words was settling in, and even though the decision wasn't in her hands, she could feel the scales tipping in her favor. The moments that followed seemed to stretch on forever. The judge listened to Peter's side one last time, and the room felt heavier with each passing second. Eleanor glanced at Monica, sitting beside her, and saw the quiet confidence in her eyes. Monica had been her rock throughout this process, guiding her with patience and wisdom, and today, the years of hard work were about to pay off. Eleanor had never felt so close to victory, and yet, a part of her was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was too easy, too clean. Peter's side had done everything they could to sway the court, but Eleanor had the truth on her side, and that, she realized, was all she needed. The judge stood up, his gavel coming down with a sharp crack. "After careful consideration of the facts presented and the evidence provided, I have made my ruling. The changes to Peter Foster's will are hereby nullified. Eleanor Foster retains her rightful claim to the property and estate, as per the original will." The words hit Eleanor like a wave crashing over her. The courtroom was silent for a moment, and then it erupted. Peter's lawyer's face fell, and Peter himself seemed to shrink before her eyes. The weight of the decision settled over Eleanor like a warm blanket. She had won. For a moment, she just sat there, letting the words sink in. She had fought for this. She had fought for herself, for her right to be heard, to be respected. The relief that washed over her was almost overwhelming. The years of pain, of betrayal, of uncertainty, it was all melting away in that one moment. Peter, however, was far from done. He stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't over, Eleanor," he spat, his voice trembling with frustration. "You haven't won. You'll regret this." But Eleanor didn't flinch. She wasn't the woman who would cower in the face of his fury anymore. She wasn't the woman who would stand quietly and let him tear her apart. She was done with him, done with the lies, the manipulation, the emotional neglect. "You've already lost, Peter," she said calmly, her voice steady, "and you'll never have the power over me again." The courtroom was filled with whispers as Peter stormed out, his pride wounded and his future uncertain. But for Eleanor, the victory was only just beginning. The road ahead would still be long, but she had reclaimed what was hers. Outside the courthouse, Monica wrapped an arm around her. "You did it," Monica said softly, her eyes filled with pride. "You fought for yourself." Eleanor smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. The fight had been long, and it had taken everything out of her, but she had won. She had taken back her life, her dignity, her place in the world. "I didn't just do it for me," Eleanor replied, her voice full of quiet strength. "I did it for all the women who've been told they're not enough. For all the women who've been made to feel small. I'm not letting anyone erase me ever again." As she walked away from the courthouse, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had fought for everything she believed in, and now she was free. The future was hers to shape, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt ready to embrace it. The months that followed the court ruling felt like the calm after a storm. Eleanor had emerged victorious, but she wasn't interested in grand gestures or sweeping celebrations. There was no need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The battle for her dignity, her rightful place, had been fought and won. Now, it was time to focus on the life she was going to build for herself. Eleanor sat in her new living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The soft light fell on the furniture she had carefully chosen, the paintings on the walls that reflected her own tastes and style. The space felt entirely hers, a place where she could finally breathe without the shadow of the past looming over her. There was a quiet pride in the way she looked around. The home wasn't grand, but it was hers. She had worked for this, and now, it was hers to enjoy in peace. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, and the loneliness that often accompanies such profound changes. But as the weeks had gone by, Eleanor had felt a growing sense of clarity and strength. She no longer felt like the woman who had been betrayed by the man she had loved for so many years. She wasn't the woman who had been swept aside, her life rewritten without her consent. No, she was the woman who had stood up, who had fought back, and who had claimed her right to live her life on her terms. The phone rang, breaking her quiet reverie. It was Monica, as it so often was these days. The two had become closer throughout the legal battle, but now, their conversations centered less on the past and more on the future. "Hey, Eleanor," Monica said, her voice warm. "How's the new place? Settling in?" Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's perfect. Quiet. Peaceful. It feels like home already." "I'm so glad to hear that," Monica replied. "You deserve it. I've been thinking, what's next for you? You've got the house, the legal victory, but what about your career? Have you thought about what you want to do?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't really allowed herself to think too much about it. After all the years spent supporting Peter, putting his needs first, and allowing her own dreams to sit on the back burner, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to pursue her own goals. But now, as she thought about the question, she realized that there was no better time to start fresh, to reinvent herself. She wasn't the same person she had been before all of this started. She was someone new, stronger, more determined, and ready to take control of her own future. "I've thought about it," Eleanor said, her voice soft but steady. "I've always wanted to do something creative, something that gives me a sense of purpose. Maybe I'll go back to school, get a degree in design or something like that. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but I know I want it to be something that's just for me, not for anyone else." Monica's voice softened, a note of approval in her tone. "Eleanor, that sounds incredible. You've got so much potential. It's time to put yourself first." Eleanor spent the next few weeks researching design schools, exploring online courses, and looking at different career paths that had always interested her. She didn't rush into anything, but with every passing day, she felt more certain that this was the direction she needed to go. She could no longer be the woman who lived in someone else's shadow. She had spent so many years supporting Peter's career, sacrificing her own aspirations, that she had forgotten who she was beyond the roles she had played in their marriage. But now, with a fresh start ahead of her, she was ready to find out. Her new home, small but comfortable, became her sanctuary. The walls were adorned with artwork she had chosen, pieces that spoke to her soul. She found herself spending more and more time painting, something she hadn't done in years. It was therapeutic, a way to express all the emotions she had bottled up for so long. Each brushstroke seemed to bring her closer to the person she was meant to be. As the months passed, Eleanor's sense of peace deepened. She wasn't rushing to fill the silence that had once felt suffocating. Instead, she embraced it. She used the quiet to listen to herself, to her own desires and dreams. The house became a reflection of her, a space that was no longer shared with the echoes of Peter's presence. It was entirely hers now, a place where she could be herself, free from judgment or expectations. Eleanor had learned something valuable during her legal battle, something that went beyond the courtroom and the financial settlement. She had learned that her worth wasn't defined by the people around her, or by what others thought she should be. She had learned that she was capable of so much more than she had ever realized, and now it was time to take that lesson into the world. One afternoon, while browsing through job listings, Eleanor saw an ad for a design internship. It wasn't a high-paying position, but it was exactly what she had been looking for. The description spoke to her in a way that nothing else had. "We're looking for someone with a passion for design, creativity, and a strong desire to learn. Experience is a plus, but we're more interested in your potential and your drive." For a moment, she hesitated. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to take a leap of faith and pursue something that felt so far removed from the life she had known? But then she remembered the woman she had become over the past year. She had fought for her life, for her peace, for her right to exist outside of Peter's shadow. This internship was the next step in that journey. She wasn't just going to sit back and let life pass her by. She was going to make it happen. She sent in her application that afternoon. It didn't take long for the response to come back. A week later, she was sitting across from the owner of the design firm, a warm and welcoming woman named Vanessa, who was impressed by Eleanor's portfolio and her enthusiasm. The conversation flowed easily, and before she knew it, Eleanor had accepted the internship offer. As she left the interview, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She was stepping into something new, something that was all her own. The excitement was palpable, and the possibilities seemed endless. She wasn't just rebuilding her life, she was rediscovering who she had been before the years of sacrifice and neglect had clouded her vision. Eleanor's days began to take on a new rhythm. The internship was challenging, but rewarding. She spent her days learning the ropes of the design industry, experimenting with color palettes, creating mock-ups, and collaborating with a team of talented, driven individuals. The work was difficult at times, but it felt right. It felt like she was finally doing something that spoke to her, something that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her evenings were filled with quiet reflection. She took long walks around her new neighborhood, enjoying the fresh air and the freedom to think. She had once been afraid of the silence, afraid of what it might mean, but now, the silence was her friend. It was a space for growth, for healing, for hope. As the months went on, Eleanor's confidence grew. The quiet pride she had once felt when looking around her home turned into a deep sense of accomplishment. She had done this on her own. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, and the future, though uncertain, felt full of promise. One evening, as she sat in front of her easel, painting the sunset in shades of orange and pink, she realized that she was no longer just the woman who had been betrayed. She was a woman who had taken control of her future, who had chosen to heal instead of harboring resentment. She was a woman who had discovered her strength, and that strength had carried her through the darkest of times. Eleanor wasn't waiting for anyone else to save her. She had saved herself. It had been a year since the court ruling, since Eleanor had taken back control of her life and her future. The whirlwind of emotions, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal had faded into the background. What remained was peace, a peace she had fought hard for, and one she had earned. Eleanor often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The woman who had once felt invisible, discarded, had emerged stronger, more confident, and at peace with herself. That she sat in her new living room, the sun streaming through the window, casting soft light over her small but carefully curated space. Eleanor felt the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. The house was a reflection of her journey, a place where she could breathe, where she could finally be herself, free from the shadows of her past. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a symbol of her transformation. She had learned so much over the past year, not just about Peter, or their marriage, or the lies he had built around their life, but about herself. She had learned that she was not defined by the betrayals she had suffered or the hardships she had faced. She was defined by her ability to rise, to rebuild, and to keep moving forward. She had rediscovered her strength, her voice, and her power. Ellie's phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Monica, as it often was. The two of them had grown closer over the past year, their friendship evolving into something deeper, something stronger. They had been through so much together, and now, as she picked up the phone, Eleanor could hear the warmth in Monica's voice. "How are you, Eleanor?" Monica asked, a smile audible in her tone. Eleanor smiled to herself. "I'm doing well, really well. I'm at peace. I've been thinking about everything, about how far I've come." "I'm proud of you," Monica said. "You've done something so few people ever do. You took control of your own life. You didn't let anyone dictate your future." The words were simple, but they hit Eleanor in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't always been this strong. There had been a time, not long ago, when she would have collapsed under the weight of Peter's betrayal. But now, after everything she had been through, she had become a woman who would never let anyone take her power again. "I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned," Eleanor said quietly. "It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about finding my worth again, about realizing that I'm enough, just as I am. I don't need anyone to validate me anymore." Monica chuckled softly. "That's the truth. You've always had that power within you. You just needed to see it." Eleanor's journey wasn't just about winning a legal battle, it was about reclaiming her life, her identity, and her peace. The road hadn't been easy. There had been times when she felt like giving up, times when she questioned whether it was worth the fight. But with each step she took, each obstacle she overcame, Eleanor found herself becoming stronger. She had started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. It was a release, a way to express everything she had kept inside for so long. And now, her walls were filled with vibrant colors, abstract landscapes, portraits, and still lifes that reflected her journey. Each painting told a story of transformation, of healing, of resilience. She had found a way to channel her pain into something beautiful, something that was entirely hers. And as her confidence grew, so did her sense of purpose. Eleanor had taken the first step toward a new career in design. She had completed her internship, and now, she was working full-time at a design firm that valued her creativity, her ideas, and her perspective. It wasn't just about the job, it was about proving to herself that she could start over, that she could build a future on her own terms. Every day felt like a new beginning, a fresh start, and each day, she woke up grateful for the chance to live her life on her own terms. But it wasn't just her career that had blossomed, it was her entire outlook on life. Eleanor had rediscovered her love for adventure, for learning, for growth. She spent weekends exploring new places, meeting new people, and trying new things. The world was wide open to her now, and she felt more alive than ever before. Were no more regrets, no more what-ifs. She had made peace with her past and was ready to embrace the future with open arms. One evening, as Eleanor sat in a small cafe, sipping a cup of tea, she overheard a conversation at the table next to her. Two women were talking about their own struggles, their own betrayals, and their own fears. They spoke about the pain of being left behind, of being made to feel small, of losing their sense of self. Eleanor couldn't help but listen, drawn to the raw honesty in their voices. One of the women spoke about her fears of starting over, of rebuilding her life after everything had fallen apart. She wondered if it was even possible to move on after such a deep betrayal. Eleanor felt the familiar stirrings of empathy. She had been there. She had been the one who wondered if she would ever be able to heal, if she would ever find her way back to herself. But now, she knew the answer. She had done it. She had rebuilt her life, not because anyone else had given her permission, but because she had found the courage to take control. When the conversation quieted for a moment, Eleanor stood up, her tea forgotten on the table. She walked over to the women, who looked up in surprise as she approached. "I couldn't help but overhear," Eleanor said softly. "I just want to say that it's possible. You can rebuild your life, even when you feel like it's all fallen apart. You have the strength inside you to get through it. You just have to believe it." The women looked at her, a mix of skepticism and curiosity in their eyes. Eleanor could see the doubt in their expressions, the uncertainty about whether they were strong enough to overcome their pain. But she had been there. She had been where they were, and she knew that it was possible. "You've already survived the hardest part," Eleanor continued. "And now, it's time to live the life you deserve." She smiled gently and turned to walk away, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. The words she had spoken weren't just for the women, they were for herself, too. She had found the strength to start over, to rebuild, and to create a life filled with meaning and purpose. And now, she was sharing that strength with others, empowering them to do the same. As Eleanor stepped outside into the cool evening air, She looked up at the stars. The night felt calm, peaceful, and full of possibility. She had come so far, and though there was still a long road ahead, she knew that the best part of her journey was just beginning. She had healed. She had found peace. And she had found the strength to move forward, no matter what. The future was hers, and she was ready for whatever came next.